So there are two microphones. There's a question over there, but I'll just mention, not a postdoc, but a pre-doc, what I'm doing about this. And in some ways, I'm kind of working at distance from the government. The PhD students are now required, some of them, to do a 3-minute thesis competition where you stand up and talk about your work in 3 minutes as if you're in a pub or in a family place. That is showing them how to communicate. I immediately decided to put them on the radio every single week, right through the summer, and I put them on for 18 months. And their response has been stunning. They're so excited. And it's all something that could be the basis for innovation. The ideas are fantastic. So tune in, Science Show, Saturday, 12 o'clock, every week. Podcasts around the world. Your question, please.
Thank you, Robert. I'm going to start with a question for Jason, but others might choose to come in on it. So I'm Peter Cronville. I'm with Creativity Australia here, and I spend a lot of time working with companies, either on boards or with management. And I'm very interested in the interface between companies and science. A lot of the conversation we just had was about government and science. It seems to me that when Richard Branson said about 3 years ago, he's given up on governments making any change because they're either despots, communists that won't make the change, dictatorships, or democracies that just can't make up their mind and make a decision. The only way it's going to happen is if he gathers together, or we gather together, major corporations, and of course that they can make the change because the decision making is simple. Well, we're 3 years later, the world has changed slowly, but I'm interested, Jason, in your proactive corporate approach to life and how we could possibly see the world change by engaging more between science and the companies, and I know there has to be government there as well. But using that partnership in the first place for this part of the conversation, would you mind showing us the way that can easily happen and effortlessly, and maybe in the next year or so fix everything up?
A worm-led recovery.
A worm-led recovery. I think there's a couple of problems there, basically. We're in the middle of revolution, change of revolutions, industrial revolution to sustainability revolution. And governments hate change. They revolt at the prospect of revolution. And the problem is, I don't think democracy is fit for the 21st century as it stands today. And until we get back to the discussion about leadership, I mean, why the hell do we have governments if it's not to provide leadership? They provided leadership in the Industrial Revolution by forging directions and, conquering Africa and stealing resources and doing things that governments needed to do then. But they're completely inappropriate for our 21st century. We need to close the UN, we need to disband the World Bank, and we need to reinvent government for the 21st century. And it needs to be much longer term thinking because we need leadership. We don't need people who want to get re-elected at the next elections. We should give people an 8 or 10 year term with no possibility for re-election. Then we get longer term decisions and short term decisions made. And government, business and academia has to work together to fix the future. We can't do the silos we've done in the past, and we need some radical change. And the only people who are going to change the world are individuals and businesses, because governments will always follow in the period of revolution. So we need to get on change democracy and redefine our institutions for the 21st century. Then we'll get some change, and we need to do it quite quickly.
Ian, comfortable with the revolution?
Well, I'm not an entrepreneur yet again, and I'm not a great fan really of the role of government. I think there's a limit to what government either can do or should be expected to do in terms of furthering creativity. It's not really its role. It can get in the way of creativity, and that's an important thing for it not to do, but I don't think it can do it. I suppose there is a role, though, for government, which is that there are, and I reluctantly say this, there are some problems that can only be solved by global action, and it's in no one country's interest at all to take them. It's a sort of prisoner's dilemma kind of problem, which can only be solved by everybody moving at the same time. Now, I mean, I think that's a hugely difficult thing to do in any case, but it could only be achieved if one were doing things at government and indeed intergovernmental level. At the same time, I'd like to, I mean, I'm not here to reinvent democracy, God knows, but I mean, I rather agree with Jason that I don't greatly admire the current system. I actually think we ought to get back to proper democracy, such as exists in Switzerland, where at small local level, everybody takes part in voting and has a stake in the outcome of what's going on. And I mean, I know until recently women didn't vote there, okay, fine. But I mean, but the fact is actually, but the model is the model is interesting. It's if you look around the periphery of Switzerland, you see all kinds of destructive development that's taken place, destructive to the environment, destructive to the local communities, and it's been done because of profit. And in Switzerland, it hasn't happened because the local people didn't actually want it. Now, in England, it's no good how much, you know, if something happens, you know, as a local person, as it were, which is all we ever are, you have no sense of control at all over the outcome.
I'd like to pick up on Nadia's point as well as your point, because it's a horrible fact of life that governments dispense funds for research. If you're public sector funding, they are the ones that will vote certain budgets for certain areas. They're the ones that give money to the research councils. And people like Nadia and myself, who have also been in that terrible position of having brilliant ideas that, again, don't get funded. This is the problem we face. Now, it's great to say, well, okay, let's overthrow this government. But where are we going to get the money from, and how is this money going to be administered, and who is going to change the criteria so that we do get funded for our innovative ideas? And whilst one can have lofty ideas of nihilism or Swiss models or whatever, at the grassroots level, rather like I suspect Nadia may be, I don't put words into your mouth, we're concerned about keeping our labs running, and all these fabulous ideas that we talk about and think about, the things we're talking about right now, have to be bankrolled somehow. They have to be bankrolled. You know, so my concern is not the future of democracy, interesting and fascinating though that may be. You may know in the UK there's lots of constitutional debates that no one's really that interested in pursuing at the moment. They've been sidelined. Yeah? But the real issue for us, like for everyone, is money. And in the case of scientists, where do we get our budgets from? And frankly, we need to think of a way that we can get funding things that are worth funding. That's the problem.
So I think just to get back to your question about how does industry and research interact, or how do we get creativity out of an industrial academic liaison, I think it's a very tricky. How do we get results out of all this? Yes. Well, yes, results that come from creativity, let's say. I think it's a very tricky question. I mean, I don't know how you felt as a scientist, but for me, I've spent my entire life in a hospital or a medical environment where I've spent an enormous amount of effort to cross the cultural divide with clinicians, for instance. And that's a very hard thing to do. It's not because there isn't goodwill, it's just that we are completely differently wired. And I think the same thing is somewhat true of industry. Now, I mean, Google may be it's the obvious exception, but unfortunately, most industry doesn't run like Google. And if it did, we probably would have a lot easier time with biomedical research getting funded through industry in a way that actually creates new ideas and breaks in new paradigms rather than just sort of shores up what's already there, which tends to be what happens. The major problem you have with the big industry is that, of course, it's an enormous ocean liner, and often in science you need to take a short, sharp left, and that is very difficult for them to do. And so, as a result, they tend to go on working on projects that are actually not particularly clever.
Can I be devil's advocate and say, we've talked an awful lot about big organizations and big money, but it's a mistake to equate science with technology. Sometimes science depends on technology. Some kinds of science does. Many of the great achievements of science were done with a pencil and paper. They're to do with thinking, and they're to do with free thinking. And in the world we live in, we're not furthering it, nor are we in science. It's extremely difficult if you have ideas that are different from other people's to get them heard. Certainly to get any funded for research, so you're forced more or less to do things on your own. And there is a group of people who are gradually ebbing away from the center of the big monolithic centers where the money is, to do research on their own. And these are inventors and truly scientific free thinkers who are actually thinking, what does this stuff really mean at the top level? Not how do I manage to manipulate everything so I get my next grant and move on another step in this process, often driven by the technology. So I just like to be a devil's advocate and say, get out the pencil and paper.
Just a quick question.
I just say, I got out the pencil and paper 20 years ago.
Yeah.
I've got brilliant theory, a novel theory about Alzheimer's, but until I have proof of concept, until I can actually show empirically, I can sit with my pencil and paper till kingdom come. It's not going to actually advance anything.
Is it working? Is it all?
Yeah.
Okay. So I have to comment on this. So, no, it's not working. Okay,
That one's
this one's
working,
working. Okay, so just to give you an example, one thing that happens when you're in your 20s and you suddenly have $20 billion is you think, well, I probably can't eat all that lunch that would come from that, and maybe I should do something else with my time. So Eric Schmidt, my boss, and his wife decided to fund an ocean science research organization with the theory that the ocean itself is part of the environment. It needs to be understood. It's misunderstood because it's far away. You don't see it. So they established a very large, like 9-figure fund for that. So I helped them spend money, so how are we going to do that? It's not that we're going to do it, but we're going to find people. It's nothing to do with Google, it's just personal. We said, well, let's look at all the things the National Science Foundation in the U.S. didn't fund. Because, see, the secret of engineering is answering questions. Science is asking questions. And NSF tends to only fund things that are certain to have an answer, which means they only can do research that was like last year's research. So we thought, well, who asked a question that if the answer was yes, or there was a possibility, it would change the world? So we started looking for those people. We're like mining the rejects of the process, and we found all the great people.
Are you
right?
still doing that? Because I think Nadia and I, we're here, so we're...
Give me a call.
Draw my card.
It's been 3 years now, and we've got several things that have come to the point where the U.S. Navy needs what we've invented. The NOAA needs what we've invented. And we said, look, in one case, this was your project. You just canceled it, even though it was working. They said, oh, we had a budget cut. So, and now you need us to save your a nuclear reactor? What is wrong with you? It wasn't that much money. It was like $20 million or whatever. What is possibly wrong with you that you would wait so late to solve these problems, right? And so we haven't given up on government. Eric goes to visit the president every month in his PCAST committee, but it's much more productive rather than having the unique access to advise the president. To just do it yourself. It's unbelievably productive. So we invented some new kind of radio that can work in white spaces, dramatically provide high-speed networking to go all across our country, and lobbyists and other people fought against that. So I went to the president of Indonesia. He said, I have 9,000 inhabited islands. 5 of them are connected reliably. What can you do? And so he didn't say, what can you do that doesn't step on toes? What can you do that keeps the same people rich? He just said, what can you do because I have babies dying that don't have good medical advice? He says, well, I have an idea and we'll do it. Okay, so we do things, and it's not just Google. There are people, man over here, there are people who say, I have an idea and let's just do something. Those people are making a huge impact. There was a time before the French Revolution where Lavoisier was in his house doing his chemistry. It might be time again for people to just do things, and maybe you do it pencil and paper.